The OLED Nintendo Switch, also known as the Switch OLED, came out over a year ago now, and was a bit of an odd addition to the Nintendo console lineup. Currently, you have the Switch Lite, introduced first in 2019 and coming in at $200 US. Then there's the original Nintendo Switch, released in early 2017, and costing today an MSRP of $300. And then at the high end, the Nintendo Switch OLED edition, costing $350. While the upgrades it brings are pretty minimal, for only $50 more, I would argue it's worth going for, though you're definitely more likely to find a deal or a bundle for the regular Switch. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and the OLED Switch came in the stead of a rumored Switch Pro model, one potentially capable of playing games in 4K, something many of us would like given the prevalence of 4K TVs. However, this didn't happen, and the OLED Switch is no more powerful than the regular one. It just has that larger, more vibrant OLED panel with reduced bezels, along with a variety of nice quality of life changes to make for a more refined experience. Nintendo has denied a Switch Pro is coming, but being that this console is already over a year old and is essentially the same hardware released almost 6 years ago, the question definitely arises, is it still worth buying? Even if you can save some cash going for a lesser expensive model that plays the same games and has the same performance? For starters, no doubt about it, if you haven't jumped on the Nintendo Switch train yet, get the OLED model. It's the best experience you can get on a Switch right now. While the quality of life changes are small, there's still absolutely improvements. Now, the OLED screen is great, it's more vibrant, but you also have little things like a better kickstand, 64 gigs of internal storage rather than 32, though like every other Switch, it still supports a micro SD card. There's also significantly better speakers, a padded dock, an Ethernet port on that dock if you like to play online. It's just a little bit better, and I think worth the extra $50. That being said, the Switch did originally come out in 2017, though the Switch being sold right now isn't the same one as the 2017 model. Specifically in 2019, they came out with the new red box model, which has better battery life, a brighter display. Besides that though, we haven't really had any substantial changes. The Switch OLED is essentially a nicer coat of paint. The actual resolution is still 720p, and if you play it docked on your TV, the max you'll ever get is 1080p, which might not look bad. With some games, graphics and especially consistent frame rates are very important and aren't always achieved on the Switch. But then there's others where, yes, it's downscaled from the PS5 and looks quite a bit worse, but what you get with the Switch is portability and versatility. You can play on your TV and you can play on the go. You can't do that with any other console. The only competition out there is the Steam Deck, which is expensive. It might be intimidating for anyone who hasn't really gamed on PC before, because it essentially is just a Switch-shaped PC. That being said, if you care about graphics, you care about higher frame rates, I do highly recommend looking into a Steam Deck. Even if it is a bit more money, I think you won't regret that decision. If you do get the Switch or you have one right now, it's probably a good idea to look up reviews of a game before you purchase it. Some games come out and are absolutely horrible performance-wise for the Switch. The Outer Worlds, when it first launched, is a good example. Sonic Frontiers might be a fun game, but it doesn't run very well on the Switch. Certain games like that, it's probably a good idea to at least know what you're getting into before you go and pay full price. With something like the Steam Deck, while there can be compatibility issues, the actual performance is going to be of a much higher quality and consistency. But that aside, I'm assuming watching this video, you might know about the Steam Deck, you might not, but you're probably interested in the Switch specifically. And there's a few camps people tend to fall into. There's those who don't have a Switch. As said, I strongly recommend you get the OLED model. There's those who have had a Switch, but maybe it's on its last legs. It's in rough condition, the battery life sucks. If it's pre-2019, I would maybe consider an upgrade to the OLED model, but if you bought it in 2019 or later, I wouldn't bother personally. My own older Switch is from 2017, and the OLED model's been a nice little upgrade, but it still does play the same games and do the exact same thing. So it comes down to the individual and how they want to spend their money. If it is just the portable aspect and battery life that's giving you issues with your old Switch, you could always get a Switch Lite, have Nintendo Online so you have cloud saves, and just switch between the two for TV and portable play. And comparing the OLED to the Switch Lite, the OLED model is better when it comes to portability. It's not as compact, but it's nice to have that larger, more vibrant screen along with better battery life. Plus, it's got the removable Joy-Cons and the kickstand, just giving it that much more versatility. So if portability is your focus, the OLED is the better model. That being said, it is $150 more. It comes down to whether or not you would ever even consider using your TV to play your Switch. If there's even a 1% chance that you would want to one day, I highly recommend just paying the extra money and going to the OLED model, because you might regret it otherwise. After all, it is called a Switch. You want to be able to switch, right? And don't forget local multiplayer. Couch co-op on Switch is the best. Nintendo's just so good with that, things like Mario Kart, Super Smash Bros, etc. You can't get that same experience on a Switch Lite. So, to summarize where we're at here, the Switch OLED is worth it. If you don't have a Switch right now, it's a no-brainer. If you already have a Switch, it comes down to your own situation, and it's definitely worth buying over both the regular model and the Switch Lite, at least in my opinion. If you want something that's a little higher powered, the Steam Deck is what you should look at. Without any Switch Pro on the horizon, or a next generation console in general, it's hard not to recommend the OLED model. It is the best. And even if it's underpowered compared to modern tech, Nintendo's never really cared too much about that sort of thing. They've always been a bit behind. Where they make up for it is in the fantastic games and the gameplay experience. And as said, portability is amazing with the OLED Switch. The colors really are improved here. OLED means true blacks. The display is able to turn off individual pixels, and basically every modern smartphone uses it nowadays. However, because the resolution is only 720p, it's a little blurry. It's definitely not crispy, and it's actually a little bit sharper looking on the regular Switch, and even sharper on the Switch Lite because they have the same resolution in a smaller display, which means technically those pixels are a little bit more crammed together. It's a pretty minute difference that most people probably wouldn't notice, and I would prefer to have a larger display that's slightly less sharp, and with the bezels thinner, it feels a lot more modern than the older Switch did. Battery life on the OLED Switch is the same as the regular model. Nintendo claims 4.5 hours to 9 hours, and then 3 to 7 hours for the Switch Lite. That battery life varies greatly depending on what you're playing. Something more intensive like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it's gonna tear through that battery a lot quicker, and they say 5.5 hours, which sounds about right. I've been playing Persona 5 lately. I've probably been on track for about 6 hours of battery life, not too bad, though it's not at super high brightness. Maybe a bit closer to 7 hours. Either way, that's a good amount of time before I need to run and go plug it in, so I'm content, and I think most will be. One perhaps underrated upgrade is actually the speakers with the Switch OLED. Most might use headphones, but if you're playing somewhere where you're able to use your speakers, it does make a big difference as they get louder and they don't distort at higher volumes. Also keep in mind, like with Xbox or PlayStation, there is a required online subscription if you want to play games online. This does come with some nice features, as well as unlocking a library of NES and SNES titles, and that'll cost you $20 a year, though you can also pay up to $50 a year and get benefits like more Mario Kart courses and access to N64 games, and weirdly enough, Sega Genesis titles. Yeah, that still feels weird even today. What really doesn't feel weird is how many great games there are for this console, just like every other era of Nintendo's system. While the best typically are Nintendo's own exclusives, there's also a ton of good third-party games, something that was sorely lacking from the Wii U, but luckily we've got it here and it's amazing. That being said, the reason you buy a Switch besides the portability is going to be the Nintendo games. You can only get them in one place, and that's on Switch. Whether it be Breath of the Wild or Mario Odyssey or any typical Nintendo title, the new Zelda's set to come out midway through 2023, and it's going to look the best on the Switch OLED, at least portably. Docked, the experience is going to be the same as the regular Switch, but the vibrant colors of the OLED look amazing with any sort of colorful art style. $350 isn't cheap, but the Switch OLED is worth it. The caliber of games more than makes up for it. Just be prepared to pay a hefty fine. Nintendo games don't tend to go on sale very often, and that's one good thing about buying physical games. If you do that, they don't really degrade in value so much. That being said, they're a pain to bring around, so buying digital is nice and easy. Whichever you prefer is up to you, but be prepared if you want a lot of games to pay a lot of money. And that's probably the biggest negative of the Switch besides the almost 6-year-old base hardware, and their complaints that tend to just fade away while I'm playing it, because it's fun to play. And that's why someone should buy a console, right? One big issue I should mention is Joy-Con drift. We're not going to go into it too much today, but it is something that can very much happen, and it's a huge pain to deal with. And last little tip here, when it comes to technical performance, make sure you look up the game before you buy it. There are some games that come out that are pretty broken, but not every game is a disaster. I showed earlier a brief comparison of Persona 5 Royal. My PS5 is running at 4K 60 frames per second. The Switch is running around 720p at 30 frames per second. There's a huge quality difference. And yeah, you can notice it going between the two. But if I just showed you this, the Switch gameplay, you would get used to it very quickly. And that's because it's a fun game. It sucks you in, and it's a great game to play portably. And while the frame rate's only 30 FPS, it is a steady, perfect 30 FPS. I've already played a good bit of this, and I have not seen it dip once. And this is a game where the art style really has the colors pop, which makes it look all the better on OLED. While I love playing the game on my PS5, it's more vibrant on Switch, at least portably. Also, almost forgot to mention here, there is a setting to switch between vivid colors and normal colors. It really comes down to preference. I actually quite like the vivid colors, but I'd also imagine it would vary game to game. The Switch is fun, and as long as the performance isn't so bad that it's going to get in the way of that, that, and for me at least, that's what matters. So I highly recommend the Switch, and definitely want to hear from you guys. How many of you out there have a Switch? Do you have the OLED model? Would you consider it if you didn't have a Switch right now? Make sure you leave a comment. And mind you, you're really not missing out on much if you do have the older Switch. It's pretty much the same thing. But if you didn't have one right now, you might as well just get the OLED. Hopefully this video helped, and if it did, maybe hit that like button. And if you're into tech content, feel free to subscribe. I'll have all my Switch videos linked in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.